So, it's really good to be here in Lisbon. Thank you for inviting me, Professor Thomas and Matos. So, what I'm going to try to do is to give you a sense of, because when people ask me, so what are you? You know, I say, oh, I'm a social learning theorist. And people go like, oh, what is that? And so I'm going to try to give you a sense of why I say that, and to also give you a sense of what I'm trying to achieve with my work. There are people here who probably have read my book so deeply, they probably know those books better than I. And there are probably some people here who don't even know who I am. And so I'm going to start from the beginning and give you a sense of the trajectory of this theory. Because I think it's important to understand that in the social sciences, when we talk about a theory, we are not so much talking about a statement about the world that is either true or false. When we talk about social theory in the social sciences, we are usually talking about a perspective, about a certain way of looking about the world that makes you ask certain questions, and perhaps that makes you take certain actions that are directed by the theory, that are informed by the theory, but that are not an implementation of the theory. Because the theory is a way of looking rather than, as I was saying, a statement of truth. So I am known mostly for this concept of a community of practice. It is not a concept that is either true or false. It's a certain way of looking at the world and asking ourselves, how is the world organized in such a way that living in the world can be an experience of learning? So going back now about 25 years to the time when we first started doing this work, and as Joao was saying, it started in my collaboration with an anthropologist. Her name is Jean Lave, and we were both been invited to join an institute called the Institute for Research on Learning. And this institute was started in 1987 in response to a report from the Department of Education in the United States. And that report, the title, and the title says everything, the title says A Nation at Risk. And that report created a stir in the education research community about the state of education in the United States. John C. Brown, who was actually at the time the director of Xerox PARC in Palo Alto, thought that schools of education would do some research on classroom techniques and so on and so forth. He thought that some people ought to go back and ask the questions, what are the assumptions we are making about learning that have created the kind of institutions that we have today, the kind of schools that we have today? And so he invited a number of scholars from different disciplines to, as he was saying, rethink learning. But of course, rethinking learning is not like that learning had never happened before. We can assume that human beings have been learning for a long time. So to create a new learning theory, my colleague Jean Lave and I started to look at apprenticeship. And the reason we wanted to focus on traditional apprenticeship, craft apprenticeship, learning to build a violin, you apprentice yourself to a craft person who is building good violins, and you become one of those yourself. The reason we were interested in the age-old process of apprenticeship is because precisely it's an age-old process, And in apprenticeship, teaching is very rare. It happens from time to time at special moments, but most of the learning happens in the company of people who know what the student wants to learn. So we found that interesting, because one of the things that we had been given as a charter in this institute is to divorce learning from teaching, is not to assume that learning is the result of teaching, but to look at learning as a phenomenon in its own right. And when we were looking at these different cases of apprenticeship across the world, Jean Lowe had been studying apprenticeship in Africa among tailors, and we looked at other cases of apprenticeship in the modern world and in different countries. One thing that we noticed is that we often think of apprenticeship as a relationship between an apprentice and a master. But when you look at actual cases, the young apprentice who has a question would never go to the master to ask that question. The master is often a distant figure. So if you have a question, you ask another apprentice who is a little bit ahead of you. And so we noticed that there was this kind of living curriculum around a master in the form of a community. And we called that a community of practice. This is how the term was born, very humbly, in these studies of apprenticeship. Since then, this concept of a community of practice has had an amazing career, because I think it touched upon something that people had experienced. Because we started to see this phenomenon of a community of practice in many circumstances where there was no formal institution of apprenticeship. Sometimes in schools, on the playground, kids were, forming little groups that had different relationship to the institution. A colleague of mine was looking at students who were in groups that were investing themselves in the school, students who were feeling marginalized and alienated by the schools, and seeing how they were learning different ways of being in the school. Another place where this concept was found interesting was in organizations. Actually, business were one of the first group that started to be interested in that concept, because they thought, at the time the field of knowledge management was a very technical field, and people were seeing the limitation of viewing knowledge as a technical process of putting stuff into a computer. And so the concept of community of practice allows them to think differently about their organization. You see, this is where a learning theory really can make a difference to what you see, because these communities had existed in many organizations for a long time, but they were invisible. They were networks that employees formed with each other to help each other learn how to do what they needed to learn, but they were invisible. And so for organizations to start wondering, what if we recognize those communities? What if we gave them a voice in the way that the organization functions? What would that do to our ability to learn as an organization? And, it is where learning theory can really make a difference. Because traditionally, in these organizations, learning was viewed as a vertical process of, you do a motion study of an employee, you optimize that, and then you serve it back as like, this is the procedure now. These organizations that had been traditionally very vertically organized for their knowledge, all of a sudden were asking people like me, can you help us develop those networks, those communities among employees, a kind of horizontal system of learning. It was a big difference. Another area where this is starting to change the perspective of people is in international development. My wife and I are working with the World Bank to develop a network of parliamentarians who are interested in increasing government transparency in Africa. It is interesting, you know, that the World Bank, which is traditionally also a very vertical organization, we're going to lend you some money and we'll send our consultants to tell you what to do with it because we know and you don't. It's a very different attitude than saying, okay, we're going to form a network across different countries so that people can negotiate with each other. How do we, and maybe with the help of some people from the north too. We're not saying that this is not happening, but it's different when you just send your consultant to tell people what to do. Or if you say, okay, we're going to create a network of people who are going to negotiate with each other what's best, and maybe call upon an expert to give a little bit of input to that learning process that is in their hands, you know? So I'm just giving you these examples to show you that actually the learning theory that you proceed with has a lot of implication for what you think is important, for what you pay attention to, and perhaps even for the kind of institution that you design. And certainly now to address the topic of this conference, for the potential that may exist in technology in enabling learning in various ways. So, now that we've taken a look at different places where this theory has had importance, you know, let's, I hope that we can also talk about education and about how a social perspective on learning can actually give us a different way of thinking about education and thinking about the value of technology in education. But before we do that, let me say two things. First, I'm going to go back now and try to give you some of the essence of this theory, what it is really trying to do. And I'm going to also take you briefly through the history of how the theory has developed over time and where it is going now. Again, I'm speaking English. You know, English for many of you is not your first language. So I'm going to try to speak not too fast. But if there is something that is not very clear, feel free to interrupt me at any time. Okay? Very often, discussing a term or discussing a concept is a good way across languages, is a good way to understand something better. So feel free to interrupt me, and there will be also a chance to discuss things at the end. But you should feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have a question or a story or something like this. Okay? Actually, I'm going to start with a little story. Some of you have already heard it, so you can go to sleep. But it's a good story because it expresses, it's a real story that happened to me. In those days, in the early 90s, where we were trying to understand what this theory was about. And it happened to me one evening when I was invited at a friend's house for dinner, and that friend of mine served me a glass of wine. And, you know, he asked me, so what do you think? And, you know, I don't know much about wine. So I said, it's pretty good. And that friend leans over the table and tells me, Etienne, this is a very good bottle. Oh, I didn't know that, but that friend of mine was actually a wine taster. That was his hobby. He had a club, and these people discussed wine, and, you know, I don't know exactly what they did, but you can imagine. And I must have looked surprised, because he started to explain to me why that was a good bottle. And to me, it was like discovering a parallel universe. Because for me, it was an okay glass of wine. But for him, it was a symphony of taste around his head, you know? there was strawberries somewhere here, there was chocolate here, a lot of oak somewhere there, you know. I think there was a strong entrance and a long lingering or something like this. For me, it was like very beautiful, you know. And then he goes into a kind of trance on his glass, and he tells me, and this one has a really good purple in the nose. And that stopped me in my thoughts. Purple in the nose. That I don't understand. You know, I mean, I couldn't taste the strawberry, but I could imagine that there would be strawberry here in a glass of wine, you know. But that there would be purple in the nose, that was beyond my imaginary capability. Because, you know, I'm not a native speaker of English. I was born in Switzerland. I grew up speaking French. But I thought I understand purple, and I thought I understand nose, you know. It turns out I was wrong, you know. Because my first thought when he said that is, yeah, people who drink a lot of wine do have a purple nose. Yeah. But that's not what I meant, of course. I knew that, you know. Apparently the wine has a nose. He is not talking about the nose of the person. He is talking about the nose of the wine. It's somewhere above the glass, something like that, you know. And the purple has nothing to do with the color of the wine. It was red wine, you know, it's kind of purple. But apparently white wine can also have purple in it, because it has to do with berries from the wood or something like this. Okay? And to me, that evening, when he said that, and we were working on the theories in that institute, I thought, this is what we're trying to capture with this theory. You can understand purple, and you can understand nose, or think you understand purple, and think you understand nose. But if you are not a member of that community, you have no idea what this really means, you know. What was happening that evening? What was across this table? We had the same glass of wine, the same dinner. But between us, there was the boundary of a community. You know? He was a member of a community where drinking wine is a whole discourse. I am not a member of that community. And there was a barrier. And the barrier was not that he was trying to make me feel stupid. On the contrary, he was inviting me into, this is how we think about wine in my community. And yet, you know, I had limited access to understanding what that really meant. Even though I could repeat the story, see? I have used this story many times in my talks, and that story now has a different meaning in my own community, in my social theory community. You see what I mean? And I still don't know, after all these years, I still don't know what a purple in the nose really means, you know? Even though I can repeat it. And I think for you, as teachers, this is actually a very, very important observation, you know? Because of course, our students get tests, they pass the test, but often when they pass the test, it's like repeating purple in the nose. You see what I mean? Do they have access to the real meaning of those things in the community where those things are a living experience? You see? Because for my friend, purple in the nose was not just a sentence. It was a lived experience of meaningfulness with respect to drinking wine in the spirit of his community. So that's the first question, I think, that a theory like this would put to an educational enterprise is, do you give people access to the experience or just to the surface features of the words, you know? And that's often something that I say to teachers who ask me, so what difference would your theory make? And my theory would say, your students, they've been with you for a year, and they've been doing mathematics, or they've been doing physics, or they've been doing history, and they have passed certain exams. For you, the question is, have they passed the exam or not? And it's important to pass exams. I don't want to deny that. But there is something else. There's another question to ask, which is, have they visited the practice where those concepts are meaningful? You know, and it's a different question, I think. It's a much more difficult question to test, and I would accept that, you know. But I have I have kids, you know, who have gone through schools, and I don't think they ever visited mathematics. You know, I don't think they ever visited physics. I don't think they ever visited biology. It's an important question to ask ourselves. How do we give? I'll tell you one thing. The other day, I was helping my son. He's 15 years old. Actually, when we were doing this, he was still 14. He was studying biology, you know? And he was actually learning all those terms. Every week, about 20 new terms he was learning. And he had an exam on Monday to see if he knew the terms, right? About the different parts of the cell and everything. I'm sure that for a biologist, those terms are important. But if you're a young student who is never going to be a biologist, probably, you know, those terms are like, okay, I'll learn them for the exam on Monday, and I'll forget them as quickly as I can the rest of the week, you know. Again, it's not visiting the practice, you know, to learn all those terms. It's a bit like the example I give. It's a bit like, you know, if I tell you I have 3 hours to visit Lisbon, beautiful city, right? You are a person, you live in Lisbon. Can you give me a sense of this city? And you tell me, oh yes, I can. Here's the map. Learn the name of the street. And then we will go, you know? We all know this would be such an absurd thing to do. You know, if you're a taxi driver, maybe you need the name of the street. Maybe not even today, because you just have your GPS. You know what I mean? And everybody understands that this is an absurd thing, you know. But I think with our students, we tend to treat them a little bit like this, you know. Certainly, one thing that this biology teacher has done to my student, to my son, is simplify his life. Because now, there's one thing he's sure about, certain: I will never be a biologist. So a great service that this school has done to that kid to help him find his way through the world. Simplify. No. Not this door. That's not maybe what the school intended, but it's certainly a simplification. Because, you know, in some sense, we have to make choices. That evening, when I was looking at my friend who was describing this beautiful glass of wine, I thought, that would be neat to be able to describe wine like this. For me, you know, the more expensive the wine is, you know, the less good it is. So there might be something wrong with me. So, hey, maybe I could learn how to appreciate wine like the connoisseurs do, you know. But, you know, here he is meeting with his club every first Thursday of the month, you know. So a lot of time I understood. If I wanted to understand wine in his way, I would have to drink a lot of wine in the company of people who know what purple in the nose is, right? And that evening I decided that I was not going to do that, because I only have so many years left on this planet, you know, and there are many things I want to do with my time, in particular developing learning theory. So I have to leave wine tasting aside, because I have a big goal to develop learning theory. See what I mean? So it's really important, when you think about it, that I was kind of using a sense of who I am, a sense of who I want to be when I grow up, you know, to say, okay, no, I'm going to leave wine tasting to the side. I'm going to just be a tourist and visit a little bit and then move on, because that's not who I am, you see. So my identity was an important filter, if you will, to see whether I should make myself accountable to this knowledge that he has. And I can tell you, I am not accountable to this knowledge, because I cannot tell you, today if you give me a glass of wine, I cannot tell you if it has good purple. And that's okay with me. It's not an identity crisis, because I'm not invested in that community. I have not made myself accountable. I heard that in Portuguese you have trouble with this term, accountable. Accountable means I don't have to feel responsible. It's not exactly like responsible, but I don't have to give an account for why I am not understanding this because I'm not a member of that community. You see what I mean? For this fact that we go through life, sort of becoming a certain person and seeing in a way where we make ourselves accountable is an important part of how learning becomes meaningful to us, you know? So, this learning theory really has, because a theory in the social sciences, oh, you have a question here. Very good, okay. Well, you get 10 points.
Okay. Sorry, my English. But occurred to me a question. That is, I agree with you. It's important to visit the practice, to live them. But how can school lead students to visit the different practice, math, physics, biology? How could school do this? Because students don't know yet what they will want to do in the future. So it's important to visit the different practice. How can school function, a school, a future school, to put this, to make this real? Do you have any ideas?
I don't really know yet. If I knew, I would write a book about that, because I think it's a very important question. And I would like you as educators to join me in that question, you know? But I think that I'm not trying to escape the question, okay? But I think that who would give me a good visit of Lisbon, you know, is somebody who loves Lisbon. It doesn't matter how long they have lived here. It doesn't have necessarily to be a native who have spent their whole life in Lisbon. But they must have a personal connection with Lisbon so that they can feel what Lisbon is. And in these few hours I have, take me there. Cheating a little bit, you see what I mean? But just take me there. And when I see the way that we try to get students to visit a practice, it's almost like you do the grunt, the beginning grunt. Like when I learned physics, you know? We had lots of work about how to calculate a cannonball trajectory, right? And that's part of physics, right? But for me, it was not very exciting as a young teenager to know how to calculate the cannonball, because it's like, okay. But in my later physics courses, what I understood is that, for instance, physicists are questioning time and space. That is much more interesting to me. If they had told me when I was 14 that they are questioning time and space, I would have been more interested, you know. So the question is, can you cheat? Can you take students quickly to the important questions? You see what I mean? Without having to do the grind of the beginning. You see what I mean? Now, if somebody wants to be a physicist, they better know how to solve the equations. But if you're not going to be a physicist, is it really important to do these detailed technical things? You see what I mean? And so, I think that I would love to hear people who are in education start to ask that question, you know. I would like the physicist to accept that kids are never going to be physicists, most of them. Let's give them a sense of physics without taking them through the learning all the names of the streets. You see what I mean? And I think what that means is probably a different kind of education for teachers, you know? Because it's a very much more personal kind of education to have a relationship to these disciplines that is not just the technicalities, but a personal connection, you know. And because I think once you have a personal connection, you know, if you love Lisbon, right, even if you've lived here for a year and you are not going to live here for your whole life, you can invite me into that. You see what I mean? So that's where I'm kind of pushing things. Yeah. But those are, to me, those are the very important questions, you know. What it also means, by the way, is that there has to be some space in the curriculum for that kind of exploration, you know. And I think that's also another problem, you know, is that we have filled the curriculum so much, you know. Actually, my son told me about his experience of high school, and in the US, high school is the last 4 years between age 14 and age 18, where you prepare for college. And he told me the problem with high school is that you can never be interested in anything, because you have to do so many things, you're so busy, you know, you cannot be interested in anything. And I thought to myself, what have we done? We've created an institution where there's so much compliance with pre-existing setup that you are not allowed for 4 years. That's a long time. For 4 years, you're not allowed to be passionate about anything. And I was just thinking, as I travel a lot around the world, and I work with many different kinds of organizations. I was just thinking, the people who I see are high contributors everywhere, you know, in business, in government, in development, in healthcare. They are always passionate, you know. There are always people who believe in something strongly and who use themselves, they use who they are as a wellspring of innovation, if you will, to solve a problem, you know. And I was thinking, have we created an institution where for 4 years you are not allowed to exercise the most critical faculty that I see in the people who are high contributors to our society today? I think that's a question that we need to think seriously, you know. And I mean that means maybe that my son, if he is allowed to be passionate about something, is not going to know the capitals of all the states in the US, right? Because that's part of the curriculum, right? But we have to make choices, you see what I mean? Today, there's so much to know that most students, the idea that we can prepare students for life, and then the rest is application, that's gone, right? There's way too much. In any case, we're going to make choices, right? So I think we have to ask ourselves, you know, what are the choices and who makes the choices, and what is the minimum that every student should know? There's a minimum, probably, that every student should know. But we have to ask ourselves not how can we fill 4 years with curriculum, but what is the minimum that every student should know, and then they can be passionate about the rest. You see? And I don't know what that minimum is. I would love to hear a school of education that does some research on what do we think the minimum is, you know? And I don't know what it is. I'm not an educator, but I'm saying I think this is a very important question, because is it necessary to take all these students through all this filled curriculum? A lot of it is meaningless to them. It's a lot of time, you know. I've learned Latin, you know. My Latin classes was 5 hours a week, 1 hour every day, for 7 years. 1 hour of school, 1 hour of homework every day. That's 10 hours for 7 years, you know. That's a lot of time. I realize I'm now getting old, you know. I realize, wow, that was a lot of time. You know, at the time, as a kid, you don't realize, because you just go with the flow, you know. And you think, oh, yeah, people who learn Latin in my school were very respected. They was kind of like, oh, you are in the Latin class, you must be good, you know. So I wanted to be in the Latin class because I wanted to be good, right? But in fact, you know, I was a good student. I had good grades. But I was never asked by my school to excel at anything. So when I reached the age 18, I had never been asked to really excel, except excel at being a student. You see what I mean? But not excel, except I did theater on my own. I studied a theater group, and at that I was outside of school. You know? So the meaningful experience was outside of school. That's kind of, you know, and I don't want to complain too much. You know, people say, oh, yeah, look, you have become a famous learning theorist. This Latin must have done you some good. True, it kept me out of the street. I was not taking drugs. But there are a lot of things you can do to avoid taking drugs. You see what I mean? That will be good for your brain, you know? So the point I'm making here is not whether we should teach Latin or not, but the fact that we have to question, you know, some of the fundamental assumptions we are making about what does it take for a human being to be a productive citizen in a 21st century, in a globalizing world. You know, we have to ask that question without sacred cows, you know. And when I was a kid, Latin was a sacred cow. Okay, we got rid of that. We replaced it with trigonometry. Today, trigonometry is a sacred cow, you know. So everybody is going to go through trigonometry. You know, I think we have to ask those questions. What does it take to be a meaningful, engaged, productive citizen in the world today? So to go back to the theory a little bit, unless somebody else wants to say something. To go back to the theory a little bit, so here is a definition of learning that has to do with engaging with the community, with engaging your experience with the competence of a community. And this is what would have happened if I had learned with my friend how to drink wine. My experience of drinking a glass of wine would have changed to the point where I could say, yes, this has a good purple in the nose. Mm-hmm. So that would have been one way to learn. Another way to learn would be to contribute to the community, to change the community, to change the competence. You know, like the first time that someone came to that community and said, oh, there is good purple in the nose in that wine. Maybe the community said, no. What are you talking about? See what I mean? When you bring something first to a community, the community says, you have been smoking, not drinking. You know what I mean? It's like you but the person said, no, try it. Try to drink it this way. Put your head a little forward, like this. Yeah. And maybe the colleagues, after a while, would say, oh, no, you're right. Good idea. Yeah, we're going to start talking like that too. See what I mean? So learning happens both when the competence of a community changes the experience of a person, there may be apprenticeship, you want to become one of those, or when the experience of a person changes the competence of the community. Learning happens both ways. But if you think of the body of knowledge, let's say, of a profession, like think about yourself as a teacher. You know, what is the body of knowledge of your profession? This is actually a friend of mine who is a lawyer who told me this is the body of knowledge of my profession. You know? And I was thinking, oh, I'm glad I'm not a lawyer to be accountable to all that. You know? But also I thought, my theory would never say that. My theory would not say that the body of knowledge is a set of books. Because this is too dead to be the body of knowledge of a profession. The body of knowledge of a profession, from my theory's perspective, looks more like a landscape. You know? A landscape of different practices. And I think it's important to see that even for the practice of being a teacher, there are lots of different practices trying to influence what happens in that classroom. And so, if you have a teacher like this, you know, he has to negotiate who he is too. You know, like me, I was negotiating who I was in front of the wine drinking friend. You know, and you know, there are lots of practices that are a candidate for determining what it means to be a knowledgeable teacher. You know. So one of them is the training. So this university, I don't know if you train teachers in this university, but if you train teachers, you hope that your training is going to have some influence. You may be completely wrong, but you hope that your training is going to have some influence on the practice of the teacher. There are also researchers who also hope, again, maybe they're wrong, but they also hope that the research is going to have some influence on the teacher. And then there is the professional society, the Association of Teachers of History in Portugal. I don't know if that exists, but anyway. That also hopes to have some influence. And then there is a regulatory body. There is probably some person in the Ministry of Education in Lisbon who's designing curriculum or whatever. And they also hope that the teacher is gonna do something with that. And then there's also in your workplace, there's your principal who has some opinions about how to make use of your time. There are the parents of the student, who say, hey, don't try something new with my kid, I learned that way, my kid is going to learn that way too, And of course your colleagues, who say, what did you do to that kid the other day? He came into my classroom all upset, So a lot of different practices, all hoping that to influence what the teacher is doing, but not necessarily agreeing, So, the curriculum says we should teach this, but the research says, well, we're not sure that this is so important, so you have to choose whether to follow the regulatory body, or follow the research, or follow the opinion of the parents, or follow the opinions of your colleagues. See what I mean? If you start seeing this as a landscape of practice, then learning to become knowledgeable in that practice, in that context, a knowledgeable teacher is going to make you decide: am I accountable to the research? Am I accountable to the regulatory body? Am I accountable to the parents? And in some sense, a responsible professional is someone who can take this whole landscape and reduce it, transform it into a moment of engagement in meaningful practice, in the service of a student. So, you can think of, the teacher, or me, or you, it's kind of like negotiating. Where am I accountable? Where am I investing myself? And this is, I put him there in the middle, but you could put yourself. I didn't have your pictures, so I had to put one. I could have put myself. I'm like that, because I want to be a good learning theorist. What do I read? Should I read Pierre Bourdieu? Should I read, I don't know, what is a big theorist in Portugal? You see, I don't even know. Shame on me, How can I be a responsible theorist if I don't know who the main theorist is today? Maybe you are, At least I know you. But you see what I mean? But we have to make choices. It's just too much, In the 21st century, we have to learn how to establish an identity of knowledgeability with respect to an entire landscape. And that may be the key difference, from a learning theory perspective, social learning theory perspective, that may be the key difference between earlier times and the 21st century. In the 21st century, the burden of deciding what matters for you as responsible professional is a bit more on you. See, if you lived in a small village in the 15th century in Switzerland, in the Swiss mountains, or in Alentejo, right? You lived with the same community for your whole life. The community was doing a lot of the work for you of deciding what matters. But as we travel the world and meet all sorts of communities, the decision of should I learn how to become a wine taster? There is not much company for me to help me with that decision. You see what I mean? So the burden of identity is a bit more on the person, I think, in the 21st century. Now, from this theorist perspective, it's not that we are moving from a collective society to an individual society. No. Some people say that. That's not what I believe. we're still social beings, just as much as before. But the complexity of the landscape means that the choices you have to make about how to constitute yourself as a productive citizen, more of the burden is on the person. And that's a significant choice that has, I think, for myself, profound implications for education, you know. Because we spent 4 years, my son spent 4 years acquiring the curriculum that had been decided by someone else, not exercising the real difficulty, the real difficult problem in the 21st century, which is how do I select where I pay attention, you know? So it's interesting, you know, because somebody asked me, well, but how can you ask a 12-year-old to decide what's important for them to learn? Fair question. But do you know what's important for them to learn? Do you really know what they need to learn to be productive in 25 years? Frankly, we don't. So, and I'm not saying that we should let the 12-year-old decide everything themselves. But why not invite them into that dialogue? You know, and I'm not saying we're like free school, you know. So what do you feel like doing today, Johnny? You know? No. What I'm saying is that if that sentence is true, that there is a shift in the burden of identity in the 21st century, then school should help students with the burden. You see what I mean? And it doesn't mean, because the burden is difficult. See? For me, the burden is part of who I am as a person who is invited to give a talk. Here I am, you know, in front of all of you, you know. I cannot start dancing and look stupid. I need to be somewhat intelligent. But I have to construct that person. That's difficult. That's confronting, you know. Sometimes people ask me questions and they're like, whoa, maybe I should know the answer to that. You see what I mean? And so my identity is being questioned by the way that I travel the world. But this is what students are going to live, you know. Even as a teacher, even as a nurse, if you are a nurse, you constantly have to choose, how do I serve this patient? Who do I listen to in all the voices that exist in the landscape? And that's the learning problem of the 21st century, you know. And so I'm going to be quick here now, because I've been speaking for a long time, and you must be tired of hearing English. But of course, technology is changing that landscape too, right? Because it gives us access across the geography to different communities, different perspectives, you know? So, you know, we're all on, you know. Some of you have your BlackBerry and you're looking at your BlackBerry while I'm talking, you know what I mean? So it changes the relationship, you know. There are different modes of engagement. You can blog today and the whole world can listen to you. It's amazing. You know, your private thoughts can be made public to the entire planet. That's incredible. That was not the case a few years ago. You know, you had to find a publisher. You know, you don't need a publisher anymore. Just open a blog. So that changes our engagement with the world. You know, it's an active medium. So the medium of activity is now computable. You know, that's also incredible. What that means is that your digital footprint becomes an important part of who you are. You know, when my daughter was 14 years old and she was talking about, you know, her sexual fantasies on MySpace, it was at the time. You know, I was kind of thinking, hey, wait a minute, do you know that this is computable? That 20 years from now, there's a search engine, you know, who can compute that it is you, you know? It used to be that we needed to hire a private eye to recompute the trajectory. You know, you're a private eye, a detective, you know, like if you think your husband is seeing someone else, to recompute the trajectory, you need to hire a detective. No more, because we have a computable active medium. That is a big difference also, you know. And of course, this reconfigures the geography. There are lots of spaces. If you want to know about education, there are 200 websites that you can go visit, you know. Or if you have a disease, there are also lots of websites that they compete for your attention. To say, yeah, you know, if you don't know how to teach math, there's this community, there's that community, so on and so forth. So, the landscape is not getting simpler. If anything, it's getting much more complicated. And paying attention is more difficult than ever before. You know? So, this, I want to just mention that, I don't want to talk too much more, but this is an important thing, you know? Because as the landscape of knowledgeability is becoming more complex, there are two trends that are very important. There's a verticalizing trend. We have developed more and more techniques to verticalize knowledge, to create evidence-based practice, you know, best practice. There is a researcher in that university who can tell you in your little school what the best practice is. Boom! You better believe what I say, because I'm a researcher. I know, you're a teacher, you don't know. I have done research, you have not done research. See what I mean? So, there are ways that we verticalize knowledge, you know. At the same time, and it's happening at the same time, a trend towards horizontalization. We can reach out through technology, through our relationship, through even the instruction of our company. We can reach out horizontally to colleagues and negotiate what counts as good practice. So these two trends are happening at the same time, and they are part of the landscape of how knowledge is established in the world, you know. And we can talk more about that if you're interested, but I don't want to, I want to finish. So, my claim, and if you remember one thing about this talk, this is what I would like you to remember. From a learning theorist perspective, social learning theory, I'm not talking about neurobiology here, I'm just talking about the engagement in the social world as a learning process, okay? From a social learning perspective, the 21st century is going to be the century of identity, because that's the big problem that our students are facing. Who am I? Who am I becoming? And what matters to me? Where do I pay attention? Where do I invest myself? That's the difficult question. Different from 200 years ago when there were 3 books in the school library, right? So there, the point was, how can I get access to those 3 books? In those days, the purpose of a school was to give access to information. That was where the school was unique in its offering. We have 3 books. You don't find that anywhere else. Come here. You know? And 3 books, that's all you had. Today, access to information is becoming unproblematic. So what do you add to that? Where are you better than Google? You know? Where are you better than the MIT's MOOC? You know? What do you add? Help students with that problem. You know? That is unique. That takes personal attention. That takes something, you know, that where you as a teacher, you cannot be replaced. You see? In that problem, you cannot be replaced because you live in that same world, you know, and you can invite students into that question. So I'm asking you, as a technology-oriented educational community, if this is true, and if you're going to be a driving force in the future of learning, the question I would like you to leave with this talk with is, how can your theory and practice help learners and educators address this fundamental challenge? I'm going to leave you with actually a part of the answer that I gave to your question, which is, if it is true that a student's identity is their biggest learning problem today, then it is also true that your identity, who you are as a teacher, is your unique, greatest pedagogical resource. Because the teachers who have had an influence on me, if I remember my growing up, they were always teachers who invited me into who they were, gave me a visit for a while, let me be something I was not yet, and opened my eyes to a new way of seeing the world. Those were the significant teachers, you know. Those were the ones I remember, you know, not the ones who were taking me through the curriculum, you know. So my question is, how can you become that kind of a teacher? And how can technology then support that process? I think those are the questions that I would like a technology-oriented education community to ask seriously and without sacred cows. Okay, thank you very much, and let's open it up for questions.